She lived in a small, quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with old houses, and the air always seemed to carry the smell of baking bread and freshly cut grass. Her home was modest, nothing fancy, but it was warm and full of life. The walls were lined with shelves that held books, trinkets, and a few framed photographs. Her parents worked hard to make ends meet, doing odd jobs and long hours just to ensure there was food on the table and a small roof over their heads. Despite the modesty of their lives, they were proud of their daughter, even if they did not fully understand her unusual fascination with music. From a very young age, she was drawn to sound. Not just the songs on the radio or the jingles in television commercials, but the everyday sounds that surrounded her. The soft tap of raindrops against the window, the rhythmic pounding of a hammer on a nail from a nearby construction site, or even the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, seemed to speak to her in a language she understood instinctively. She would often sit quietly listening, her eyes closed, imagining melodies hidden in those ordinary noises. While other children played outside or chased after balls, she would linger by the window, tapping out imaginary tunes with her fingers on the sill. The real turning point came one rainy afternoon when an old piano arrived at their home. It had been bought secondhand from a neighbor who was moving to another city. The instrument was scratched and a few of its keys were slightly stiff, but it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It sat in the corner of the living room, silent but brimming with possibility. The moment she laid her hands on it, something inside her awakened. She pressed a key, then another and another, and was instantly captivated by the way each sound seemed to come alive beneath her fingers. She did not know the names of the notes or the proper technique. All she knew was that the piano was speaking to her in a way no one else could understand. At first, her attempts were clumsy. Her fingers stumbled over the keys, producing awkward noises that sounded more like random banging than music. When her neighbors passed by the window and heard the strange clattering, some would snicker or shake their heads. A few classmates at school, noticing the faint sounds escaping through the walls of her home, would laugh and say, "Who does she think she is, trying to play that old piano? It's just noise." The words stung, but she did not let them stop her. She was learning to listen to the music in her own way, discovering rhythm and melody on her own terms. Her parents were curious at first, watching her fingers move hesitantly over the keys. They were unsure whether to encourage her, worried that music was an impractical pursuit. They had dreams for her to study, to get a steady job, and to live a life free of hardship. Yet they also recognized the passion in her eyes, the way her face would light up when she produced a sound that pleased her. Slowly they began to support her, finding time to show her simple techniques and helping her understand that patience and practice could turn those awkward sounds into something beautiful. Despite this support at home, the outside world remained skeptical. The neighborhood children would sometimes gather outside her window, teasing her as she practiced. "Why do you keep banging on that thing?" they would shout. "You'll never be good at it." At school, teachers barely noticed her attempts at learning piano. When she shared that she wanted to perform at a school event one day, a few of them chuckled, shaking their heads as if the idea itself were absurd. These moments could have crushed her spirit, but instead they seemed to fuel her determination. Every laugh, every sneer became a tiny spark pushing her forward. She decided that if anyone was going to doubt her, she would let her music do the talking, quietly but powerfully. Her practice was far from easy. The old piano had its quirks, some keys sticking, others refusing to play unless pressed just right. She had to adjust her fingers, sometimes for hours, to get a single note to sound the way she wanted. She would spend evenings after finishing homework, sitting on the small wooden stool, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the keys, and her mind entirely absorbed in the sound she wished to create. She experimented with simple melodies at first, learning to make the instrument produce tunes that sounded like small stories. Slowly, she began to combine notes into longer sequences, learning by trial and error which combinations pleased her ear and which did not. Sometimes, late at night, the house would be silent except for the piano and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Her parents would listen from their bedroom, barely breathing, not wanting to disturb the music. They felt a mixture of awe and pride. She had a presence when she played, an intensity that made it clear this was more than just a hobby. The notes seemed to carry her thoughts, her feelings, and a part of her soul. Even though she had yet to perform for anyone outside the home, her music had already begun to tell a story that only she could hear in full. The more she practiced, the more she realized how music had become a part of her life. It was not just about playing the right keys or following instructions. It was about emotion, about finding the right expression for feelings she could not yet put into words. When she played, she felt joy, frustration, hope, and sadness all at once. Each note was a reflection of her experiences, her dreams, and the small struggles of everyday life. She began to understand that the piano could be her voice, the way she could communicate with the world when words failed her. Though she loved her practice time, it was not without its challenges. Sometimes the harsh voices of her peers echoed in her mind, making her doubt herself. She would remember the laughter, the whispers, and the rolling eyes of those who thought her efforts were silly. But she had learned a quiet resilience. She began to tell herself that their laughter was not the truth, only their perception, limited and small. Her music was hers alone, and it did not need their approval to exist or to matter. Each time she returned to the piano, she reminded herself that she was creating something real, something that could not be taken away. Her school life was still a struggle. While others excelled in sports or popular social activities, she was known as the quiet girl who spent hours at the piano. Many teachers overlooked her talents, and she was often left out of group activities. Some children teased her for being different, for not conforming to their idea of what was normal or fun. There were moments when the sadness of isolation crept in, but even then, the piano became her sanctuary. Its keys offered her a place to escape, a place to dream, and a place where she could be fully herself without judgment. She also began to notice the small joys in her learning. When a piece finally came together after hours of practice, when the notes flowed naturally and the melody sounded exactly like she imagined, she would feel a quiet triumph that no applause could match. Those small victories were her motivation. Each day, she learned a little more, discovered new techniques, and grew more confident in her ability to express herself. Slowly, the awkwardness of her early attempts faded, replaced with a growing sense of artistry. Her parents, too, started to see the transformation. They watched as their daughter sat with perfect focus, her eyes sparkling with determination. They realized that this was not a passing phase, not a childish whim. Music had become her language, and the piano was her companion. They did what little they could to support her. They saved money to buy her a few sheet music books, gave her encouragement when she felt frustrated, and occasionally invited a distant neighbor who knew a bit about music to give her small tips. It was modest support, but it meant the world to her. By the time she turned 12, her skills had grown quietly but steadily. She could play pieces she had once only dreamed of, her fingers moving confidently over the keys. Yet the outside world still had not fully recognized her talent. Classmates still whispered, neighbors still shook their heads, and teachers still barely noticed her growing abilities. But she had learned to find satisfaction not in recognition but in the music itself. Every note, every melody was a step closer to expressing what she felt inside, and that was more important than any applause or praise. Evenings became her favorite time of day. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the world outside grew quiet, she would sit at the piano and let the music flow freely. Sometimes she played softly, a gentle tune that mirrored the calm of the twilight. Other times she played passionately, letting frustration, excitement, or longing pour into the keys. Music had become her diary, her confidant, and her escape. She knew that one day perhaps the world outside would hear her too, but for now it was enough that she could play, that she could create, and that she could feel alive in her own melodies. Through all the laughter, the ridicule, and the doubts, she learned a powerful lesson. Passion and persistence could flourish even in the quietest corners. She had discovered a voice that no one could silence and a dream that no one could diminish. And though the world outside her little house had not yet recognized her, she knew in her heart that one day they would. But until then, she would continue to play, letting the music speak for her. Note by note, story by story, in a language that needed no words and no permission. As she grew older, her love for the piano deepened, but life around her did not grow any easier. School days were long, filled with lessons and chores, and often she would return home exhausted, yet the piano still called to her. Some evenings, when her friends were outside playing games or chatting, she would sit quietly in her room, her fingers tracing patterns across the keys. It was not just a habit. It was a necessity. Music had become the only place where she could fully breathe and exist without worry. But her talent, though growing, was still invisible to most people. At school, she tried to share her progress with her classmates, hoping for encouragement or even curiosity. Instead, she was met with laughter or indifference. Some would whisper behind her back, saying she spent too much time banging on that old piano and that she should focus on more practical things. Even a few teachers questioned whether it was a good idea for her to spend so much energy on music. "Why not join the sports team or work on your grades?" they would ask, genuinely concerned but unaware of how vital the piano had become to her. These words often lingered in her mind, and sometimes, late at night, she would wonder if maybe they were right. She began to notice a pattern in how people reacted to her music. The ones who laughed were often those who had never tried to create something themselves, those who never understood the dedication required to learn and grow. Others simply did not see the beauty in what she was doing. At first, these reactions hurt her deeply. She would lock herself in her room, staring at the worn-out keys and wondering if she would ever be good enough for anyone to notice. The piano, though comforting, could not completely erase the ache of doubt that crept into her heart. Despite these challenges, she never stopped practicing. In fact, the more she was underestimated, the more determined she became. She had a quiet voice inside her, one that refused to be silenced. It reminded her that talent was not about approval or applause. It was about the joy of creating and the courage to continue. Slowly, she began to focus less on what others thought and more on what she felt when she played. Every mistake became a lesson, every awkward sound a stepping stone. With time, she started to notice small improvements. A melody that once took an hour to master could now be played effortlessly. She began experimenting, trying new techniques and even composing her own short pieces. Her parents watched with a mix of pride and concern. They could see how deeply she loved the piano, and though they worried about her future in a world that often demanded practical skills, they also understood that this was who she was. On weekends, when they had a little extra time, they would sit quietly in the living room listening as she played. Sometimes her music was soft and gentle, like a lullaby for the entire house. Other times it was bold and daring, filling every corner of the small home with energy. Each note told a story they could feel even if they did not fully understand. The turning point came one afternoon when a distant relative visited. She had never met him before, but he had a background in music and could recognize talent when he saw it. When she nervously began to play a simple piece, he stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening in surprise. He listened intently as her fingers danced across the keys, creating sounds far beyond what her age or experience would suggest. When she finished, he did not clap immediately. Instead, he leaned back and said softly, "You have something special. You must never stop practicing." His words were unlike any encouragement she had received before. They were not pity or casual praise. They were a recognition of the hard work and natural gift that had been quietly growing inside her. That evening, after the visitor had left, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Excitement because someone had seen her talent clearly, for the first time without judgment or doubt. Fear because it meant she could not hide anymore. If she wanted to grow, she would have to face the world outside her small room, and the thought of performing in front of strangers made her stomach twist with nerves. But she also felt a spark of hope, a quiet promise that if she persevered, things could change. The weeks that followed were a mixture of struggle and small victories. She continued her daily practice, but now she had a new sense of purpose. She began to challenge herself with more complex pieces, often spending hours perfecting sections that were particularly difficult. Sometimes her fingers ached, and sometimes the notes refused to come out as she imagined. There were days when frustration overwhelmed her and she wanted to give up, but she remembered the words of her relative. "You have something special. Never stop practicing." Those words became a mantra, repeated silently as she sat at the piano late into the night. At school, things remained largely the same. Classmates still teased her occasionally, though she found she could ignore most of it now. A few began to watch curiously when she played during lunch breaks or free periods, but their interest was quiet, cautious, almost tentative. She learned to embrace these small moments, understanding that recognition does not always come all at once. Sometimes it is slow, subtle, building quietly until the world cannot ignore it. One day, her teacher announced that the school would hold a small talent show. It was not a grand event, just a way for students to showcase their hobbies and skills, but for her it felt monumental. Her heart raced at the thought of performing in front of a room full of people. She knew the scoffs and whispers could return, but she also felt a strange excitement. This could be the first chance to let her music speak outside the walls of her home. Preparation for the talent show became her new focus. She chose a piece she had been practicing for months, one that combined gentle melodies with moments of bold expression. It was not easy. Her hands would tire and sometimes her mind would wander in anxiety, but she persisted. Each day she grew more confident, her fingers moving more smoothly over the keys. She began imagining the performance in her mind, visualizing herself standing in front of the audience, hearing the first note echo across the room, and feeling the music flow through every listener. The visualization helped ease her nerves, turning fear into determination. The night before the show, she barely slept. Her mind was alive with anticipation and doubt. What if they laughed? What if she made a mistake? What if all her hard work went unnoticed? Yet beneath the worry, a quiet voice reassured her. It reminded her of the long hours she had spent practicing, of the countless melodies she had created in her room, and of the small triumphs that had made her believe in herself. She realized that whether or not anyone clapped, she had already accomplished something remarkable. She had nurtured a talent that no one could take from her. When the day of the talent show arrived, the nerves came flooding back. She stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly, listening to the applause for the performers before her. Each round of claps made her heart beat faster, but she reminded herself to breathe, to focus on the music, and to trust herself. When it was finally her turn, she stepped onto the stage, her eyes scanning the room filled with students, teachers, and parents. She could feel the weight of their expectations or perhaps their lack of belief, but she refused to let it control her. Sitting at the piano, she closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but as she continued, a transformation occurred. Her fingers moved with confidence, each sound flowing naturally, carrying the emotion she had kept hidden for so long. The melody rose and fell, filled with joy, longing, and determination. The audience, initially restless, began to listen. Whispers faded, and eyes that had been skeptical turned toward her with quiet surprise. The music spoke in a way that words never could. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then slowly, applause filled the space. It was not just polite clapping. It was genuine appreciation, a recognition of the effort, skill, and heart she had poured into her performance. Even those who had once doubted her now looked at her with a mixture of amazement and respect. She felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, and pride all mingling together. She had faced her fears, shared her gift, and for the first time the world had listened. The talent show became a turning point. It was not just a performance, it was a statement. She had proven to herself and to others that dedication and passion could overcome doubt and skepticism. The recognition she received was encouraging, but more importantly, it reinforced her love for the piano and her belief in her abilities. She realized that challenges would always exist, that some people would doubt or mock her, but her persistence and talent could shine through, no matter what. From that day forward, she continued to practice with renewed energy. She sought out opportunities to learn more, to explore new pieces, and to connect with others who shared her love for music. Though the road ahead would still be filled with obstacles, she now knew the power of resilience and the importance of believing in herself. Her music had become her voice, and she had found the courage to let it be heard, one note at a time. After the talent show, her world felt a little brighter. For the first time, she could see that people could be surprised by something she had worked hard to create. She still faced skeptics, but there were also those who began to notice her dedication. Her confidence grew quietly, like a small flame that could not be extinguished. She continued her daily practice, but now there was a new energy in her fingers, a sense of purpose that went beyond just playing at home. She knew that her music could reach more people if she dared to take the next step. Her parents were proud, though they were careful not to let her become overconfident. They reminded her that talent alone would not be enough. Hard work and persistence were still the keys. They helped in small ways, making sure she had quiet time to practice, encouraging her when she felt tired, and occasionally letting her perform for neighbors or distant relatives. Each small audience was a chance to test herself, to face nerves and keep learning. These little performances became stepping stones, preparing her for something larger, something that required not just skill, but courage. One afternoon, she received an unexpected invitation. A local music teacher who had attended the talent show had been impressed by her performance. He offered to give her a few private lessons, free of charge, recognizing her potential and wanting to nurture it. She could hardly believe it. For years she had taught herself, learning slowly and carefully from books and imagination, but now she had someone who could guide her, someone who could show her the techniques and subtleties that might have taken years to discover alone. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. What if she failed to impress him? What if she could not keep up with the lessons? The first lesson was humbling. The teacher watched her play, nodding thoughtfully as she ran through some of the pieces she had been practicing. Then he began to point out mistakes she had never noticed, small details about posture, finger placement, and timing. At first it was frustrating. She had worked so hard, yet there were so many things she still did not know. But slowly she began to see the value in his guidance. Each correction made her music clearer, more expressive, and more precise. She realized that learning from someone experienced did not diminish her talent. It enhanced it. Her practice routine grew more intense. She divided her day carefully. School in the morning, chores and homework in the afternoon, and piano practice in the evenings. Sometimes she would practice until her fingers ached and her eyes felt heavy with strain. But she had learned to embrace this effort. Each long hour at the piano was a chance to improve, a step closer to mastering the pieces she loved. She experimented with dynamics, learning how to make music soft and delicate at times, bold and dramatic at others. She began to understand that playing was not just about hitting the right keys, but about telling a story through sound. At school, things began to shift slowly. A few classmates who had once laughed began to watch quietly when she played. They were curious now, noticing the dedication and skill she displayed. Some even asked her questions, wanting to learn a little about how she practiced or what inspired her music. Though she remained quiet and humble, she felt a small sense of validation. She realized that recognition did not always come immediately, and that the most important thing was the progress she made for herself, not the approval of others. One day, her music teacher suggested something daring. "There is a citywide youth music competition next month," he said. "It is open to anyone under 18. I think you should enter. It will be challenging, but I believe you are ready." Her heart skipped a beat. The idea of performing in front of a large audience, of being judged alongside other talented students, was terrifying. But there was also a spark of excitement. This was an opportunity to show her abilities on a bigger stage, to see how far her practice and dedication could take her. After some thought, she agreed. She would enter the competition. The preparation began in earnest. She chose a piece that was ambitious, something that would stretch her skills and show her range. It was not easy. Parts of the music were technically difficult, and some sections required emotional depth she had never explored before. At first, she stumbled frequently, frustrated by the mistakes her fingers made despite her best efforts. But she learned to be patient with herself. Each error was not a failure, but a lesson. She would play a section repeatedly, slowly at first, until her fingers remembered every movement, until the notes flowed naturally and effortlessly. Her teacher guided her through the emotional side of performance as well. "Music is not just about playing notes correctly," he said. "You need to feel it. You need to let the audience feel it too. If your heart is in it, your music will reach them even if you are nervous." She took these words to heart. She practiced not just technically but emotionally, learning to convey feelings through every note. The quiet, careful melodies could speak of longing and tenderness, while louder, faster sections could express joy, determination, or struggle. She discovered that music was not just sound. It was communication, a way to reach people without words. The days before the competition were filled with tension. She practiced in the mornings, evenings, and sometimes late into the night. Her fingers sometimes blistered, her arms ached, and her mind became tired, but she did not stop. She had grown to understand that mastery required dedication and sacrifice. She also began to imagine the audience she would face, picturing the people in the hall, the judges watching, and the quiet murmurs of those who had doubted her in the past. This visualization both terrified and motivated her. She wanted to show them what she could do, but more than that, she wanted to prove to herself that she could rise to the challenge. Her parents watched quietly, noticing the change in her. She was no longer just a child playing an old piano at home. She was becoming an artist, someone who understood the discipline required to pursue a dream and the courage needed to face the unknown. They tried to support her in practical ways, ensuring she had nutritious meals to maintain her energy, quiet time to practice, and encouragement when the stress became too much. They could not fully understand the depth of her dedication, but they respected it and were proud to see her grow into her potential. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. She entered the hall, eyes wide at the large stage, the bright lights, and the rows of seats filled with students, parents, and judges. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She could hear whispers and murmurs from the audience, some curious, some skeptical. For a moment she doubted herself, questioning whether she could truly perform under such pressure. But then she remembered every long hour at the piano, every moment of practice, and every small victory she had earned along the way. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had worked hard, that her music was a reflection of her heart, and that she was ready. As she sat at the grand piano on stage, she closed her eyes briefly, letting the familiar feel of the keys ground her. Then slowly she began to play. The first notes were deliberate, careful, but soon they flowed naturally. She lost herself in the music, feeling the emotions behind every melody, every chord. The audience, initially restless, began to quiet down, captivated by the skill and depth she displayed. She could see the judges leaning forward, listening intently, and she felt a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. Every note she played told a story of struggle, determination, and love for music. As the performance continued, her confidence grew. She moved through the difficult passages with precision, but also with feeling. Her fingers danced across the keys, bringing the music to life in a way that surprised even her. She had always known the power of her talent in private, but now she felt it in a public space, witnessing the effect it had on others. By the time she reached the final notes, the room was silent, everyone completely absorbed. When she finally lifted her hands, the applause was thunderous. It was not just polite clapping. It was recognition, respect, and amazement. The judges smiled, nodding in approval, and the audience cheered. She had done more than perform. She had moved people with her music. After the competition, she was approached by teachers, parents, and even students who had once doubted her. They complimented her skill, her emotional expression, and her dedication. She felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced before. But more than the recognition, she realized the most important victory was her own growth. She had faced a larger stage, bigger challenges, and she had risen to meet them. Her confidence was stronger, her skills sharper, and her love for music deeper. That evening, as she returned home, she sat at her familiar piano, now with a sense of pride and gratitude. The old keys beneath her fingers felt the same, yet something had changed. She had discovered not only her talent, but also her ability to overcome doubt and fear. She understood that every note, every practice session, every moment of perseverance had led her to this point. And while the competition was a significant step, she knew it was just the beginning of a much larger journey. The weeks following the citywide competition were filled with excitement and new challenges. Her performance had brought her some recognition, but it had also attracted attention from people who wanted to see more. She received invitations to local events, community programs, and small gatherings where she could play. Each opportunity was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. She had learned how to handle nerves in smaller settings, but these new invitations demanded more. Each stage was bigger, the audience larger, and the expectations higher. The pressure weighed on her, but she welcomed it. This was the path she had dreamed of, and she was ready to follow it. Her days became busier than ever. Schoolwork still had to be done, chores still needed attention, and practice had to fit in between everything else. She often found herself sitting at the piano late into the night, her eyes tired, her fingers aching, yet her mind focused entirely on perfecting each piece. She was no longer just playing for herself. She was preparing to inspire others, to show that passion and hard work could triumph over doubt. The thought of standing on stage, of people listening to her music and feeling something real, pushed her to keep going even when exhaustion threatened to take over. Her music teacher continued to guide her, introducing more advanced pieces and teaching techniques she had never encountered. He encouraged her to experiment, to find her own voice within the music. "You have skill," he said one afternoon, "but talent alone is not enough. You need emotion. You need presence. When you play, the audience should feel every note." These words resonated deeply, She realized that the next level of performance was not just technical skill, but the ability to connect, to reach people's hearts through music. She practiced not only the notes but the story behind them, learning how to express joy, sorrow, tension, and release through her hands alone. One day, she received news that both thrilled and terrified her. A regional music competition was taking place in the nearby city. It was much larger than the previous events she had participated in, with dozens of talented young musicians from different schools and communities. Her music teacher encouraged her to enter, insisting that she was ready. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The stakes were higher, the audience larger, and the talent around her formidable. She knew this was an opportunity to test herself like never before, but it also meant facing her deepest insecurities. Preparation for the regional competition became her entire world. She selected a piece that was complex, emotional, and technically challenging. It demanded precise fingerwork, perfect timing, and a deep connection to the music itself. Some days she struggled to get even a few measures to sound right. Her frustration grew as she realized how much effort was still required. She would sometimes slam her hands down in exasperation, feeling the weight of her own expectations. Yet she refused to give up. She reminded herself that every great musician had faced moments of struggle, and that persistence was the only way to grow. Her family noticed the change in her. She had become quieter, more focused, and occasionally impatient with distractions. They understood the pressure she felt, and they tried to support her in small ways. Preparing meals she could eat quickly, giving her quiet time to practice, and occasionally offering words of encouragement when they saw her frustration. Their belief in her was unwavering, and it gave her a sense of comfort amid the chaos of preparation. She knew that no matter what happened in the competition, she had a foundation of support that could never be taken away. As the day of the competition approached, her nerves intensified. She imagined the large hall, the bright lights, the rows of seats filled with strangers, and the judges who would scrutinize every note. The thought of performing under such pressure made her stomach twist, yet it also fueled her determination. She spent hours rehearsing, visualizing herself playing perfectly, imagining the music flowing seamlessly, and picturing the audience responding to her performance. This mental preparation became as important as physical practice. She learned to calm her breathing, focus her mind, and trust her fingers to play what her heart felt. On the day of the competition, she arrived early at the venue. The hall was massive, with a polished wooden stage and rows of seats that seemed to stretch endlessly. She could see other participants rehearsing, their confidence and skill impressive and intimidating. Some seemed naturally talented, their fingers gliding effortlessly across their instruments. She felt a pang of doubt. Could she really compete with them? Was she truly ready to show her music on such a large stage? But then she remembered every long hour of practice, every note learned, every mistake overcome. She reminded herself that this was her chance to shine, not to compare herself to others, but to express her own voice through music. When it was finally her turn, she walked onto the stage with a mixture of fear and determination. The lights were bright and the audience was silent, waiting. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar comfort of the piano keys beneath her fingers. Then she began to play. The first notes were tentative, testing the hall, finding their place in the vast space. But as she continued, she became fully immersed. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note deliberate, each melody expressive. The complex passages flowed with precision, and the emotional depth of her performance became evident. The audience, initially quiet, began to respond. You could see the subtle nods of heads, the leaning forward of eyes eager to catch every sound, the shifting of people as they absorbed the music. Even the judges, who had seen countless performances, were captivated. They leaned in, listening intently as the music painted vivid images in the minds of everyone present. She felt a surge of emotion as she realized that her music was reaching people in a way she had never imagined. Every note carried not only technical skill but her own story, her struggles and her triumphs. As she played the final section, her heart raced. This was the moment that could define her, the culmination of months of preparation and years of practice. Her fingers moved swiftly, but she maintained control, each note resonating with clarity and emotion. The hall was silent except for the piano, the music filling every corner, wrapping around every listener. She could feel the power of the moment, The connection between her and the audience. For a few minutes, nothing else existed, only the music and the shared experience it created. When the last note faded, there was a pause. For a heartbeat, the hall was completely still, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then slowly applause began, at first quiet, then growing louder until it became a wave of sound that filled the room. People were clapping, some standing, some whispering to neighbors about the performance they had just witnessed. The judges nodded, smiling, clearly impressed. She felt a mixture of relief, joy, and pride unlike anything she had experienced before. She had faced her fears, performed on a stage far larger than anything she had imagined, and left a mark with her music. After the performance, people came up to her. Some offered compliments, expressing awe at her skill and emotional depth. Others asked questions, curious about her practice, her inspiration, and how she had developed her talent. Even a few participants from other schools admitted they had been surprised by the level of mastery she displayed. She listened quietly, smiling, grateful for the recognition, but also aware that the most important acknowledgement had already come from within herself. She knew she had grown, not just as a musician, but as a person capable of facing challenges and rising to meet them. That evening, as she returned home, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The competition had been more than just a test of skill. It had been a confirmation of her dedication, resilience, and passion. She realized that music was not just something she played, but something she lived. It had shaped her discipline, her focus, and her confidence. She sat at her familiar piano, feeling the smooth keys under her fingers, and played softly, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for herself. The music flowed naturally, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The experience also taught her about the power of perseverance. She remembered the early days when neighbors laughed at the strange sounds she made, when classmates mocked her, when teachers doubted her abilities. She had endured those moments, practiced in secret, and nurtured her talent patiently. Now, standing on the other side, she realized that each challenge had strengthened her, each doubt had motivated her, and each moment of perseverance had led to this triumph. She understood that true success was not measured only by applause, but by the courage to continue despite fear and uncertainty. As the days passed, she continued to perform at various events, each one building her confidence and skill. She learned to handle nerves, to express emotion more deeply, and to connect with her audience on a profound level. Her reputation as a talented and dedicated pianist began to grow, drawing attention from teachers, musicians, and community members who recognized her potential. Yet she remained humble, knowing that every note played, every piece learned, and every performance given was part of a continuous journey of growth and self-discovery. Through it all, she never lost sight of why she played the piano. It was not about fame, prizes, or recognition. It was about expression, emotion, and the quiet joy of creating something beautiful. She had discovered that music had the power to touch hearts, to inspire, and to communicate in ways words never could. And as she looked ahead to future performances and new opportunities, she felt a sense of anticipation and hope, knowing that her journey was only just beginning, and that each note she played could carry her further than she had ever imagined. After the regional competition, life seemed to open new doors for her. The applause, the praise, and the recognition she had received were unforgettable, but more than that, they gave her the confidence to dream even bigger. People from her community began to take notice. Neighbors who once mocked the sounds from her piano now stopped to listen, quietly admiring her dedication. Teachers at school acknowledged her talent, sometimes asking for advice or inviting her to play at school events. The world she had imagined for so long, a world where her music could be heard and appreciated, was slowly becoming real. Her family shared in her pride. They had watched her grow from the quiet girl who practiced alone in a corner to someone capable of captivating entire rooms with her music. They encouraged her to keep moving forward, to explore every opportunity that came her way, and to never forget the passion that had brought her this far. Their support, constant and unwavering, remained the foundation she relied on. She knew that no matter where her talent took her, the love and encouragement at home would always be her safe place. New opportunities began to arrive unexpectedly. Invitations to perform at city events, community gatherings, and charity programs appeared, each one more significant than the last. She met other young musicians, some with extraordinary talent, and learned from their experiences. These encounters helped her understand that music was not a competition, but a shared journey. She discovered that collaboration and learning from others could make her own music even richer and more expressive. The piano was no longer just her own world. It was a bridge connecting her to other people who shared her passion. Despite her growing success, challenges remained. Not every performance went perfectly, and sometimes nerves threatened to overpower her. There were moments when she questioned herself, wondering if she was truly good enough or if she could continue to grow. But she had learned to embrace these feelings as part of the journey. Each mistake, each moment of doubt was an opportunity to learn. She realized that perseverance and self-belief mattered more than instant perfection. Her ability to continue despite fear became one of her greatest strengths, and it showed in every performance she gave. Her music teacher remained an essential guide in her life. He encouraged her to explore new styles, experiment with composition, and push her abilities beyond the familiar. Under his guidance, she began to compose her own pieces, blending techniques she had learned with the emotions she wanted to convey. Each composition became a reflection of her journey, telling stories of struggle, hope, determination, and triumph. She discovered that creating music was not just about performing, but also about expressing herself in ways that were uniquely her own. Word of her talent began to reach further. Local newspapers wrote short features about the young pianist who had amazed audiences, and social media posts shared clips of her performances. While she was not seeking fame, she recognized that her music had the power to inspire others just as it had inspired her. Letters and messages arrived from people expressing admiration, encouragement, and sometimes personal stories about how her music had touched them. Each message reminded her that her journey had a purpose beyond her own growth. It could uplift, comfort, and connect others. She also began mentoring younger students who shared her love for music. She taught them the basics, encouraged their practice, and shared her experiences of perseverance and dedication. Watching their excitement and progress reminded her of her own beginnings, the long hours spent at an old piano, the mistakes that felt overwhelming at the time, and the small victories that had fueled her determination. She realized that her journey was not only about her personal success, but also about helping others discover the joy and power of music. One day, a particularly important performance opportunity came her way. She was invited to play at a regional festival attended by professional musicians and educators. It was the most prestigious event she had encountered so far, and the audience would include people who could shape the course of her musical future. The news thrilled her, but it also brought a wave of anxiety. The stakes were high, and she knew she would have to bring her very best performance. Still, she accepted, determined to rise to the challenge and show the full extent of her abilities. Preparation for this festival was intense. She chose a piece that combined technical skill with deep emotion, something that demanded both precision and feeling. She practiced tirelessly, breaking down difficult passages, perfecting her timing, and experimenting with dynamics to convey the emotions behind each note. She also rehearsed in front of family and close friends, learning to perform under pressure and receiving feedback to refine her expression. Every detail mattered, from posture to breath control to the subtle nuances that would make the music come alive. The day of the festival arrived, and the hall was magnificent. The stage was set with bright lights, and the audience filled the seats, buzzing with anticipation. She could see young musicians from different cities, each preparing with determination and focus. She felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nerves. As she waited backstage, she reflected on her journey. The countless hours of practice, the ridicule she had once endured, the small victories at home, and the recognition that had slowly grown around her. She understood that she had come far, but she also knew that this performance would be a defining moment. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with steady determination. The bright lights warmed her face, and the audience seemed to quiet in anticipation. She sat at the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The music flowed naturally, a perfect blend of technical mastery and emotional depth. Every note carried her story. Every melody reflected her journey. She could feel the audience listening intently, caught in the rhythm and emotion of her performance. The music was no longer just sound. It was a conversation between her and everyone present, an expression of her experiences, dreams, and heart. As she continued, she became completely absorbed in the music. She was aware of the technical challenges, the fast passages, and the intricate rhythms, but she also let her emotions guide her fingers. The highs and lows of the piece mirrored her own life, the moments of doubt, the hard work, the small victories, and the triumphs. Each note resonated with honesty, and the audience could sense it. Some closed their eyes, letting the music fill them, while others leaned forward, captivated by the skill and feeling displayed. Even the professional musicians in the audience were visibly impressed, nodding and smiling at the precision and expression. The final notes rang out, echoing through the hall. There was a moment of complete silence, as if the audience were holding their breath, savoring the last sound. Then the applause began, slow at first, then growing louder until it became a powerful wave of appreciation and admiration. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, and expressing their awe at what they had just witnessed. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and deep joy. She had poured everything into that performance, and it had been received with the respect and admiration she had long hoped for. After the performance, many people approached her to offer congratulations. Professional musicians complimented her technique, music educators praised her emotional expression, and fellow young performers shared their admiration. She felt humbled and grateful, knowing that all her hard work had led to this moment. She also realized that her journey was about more than just personal achievement. It was about touching lives, inspiring others, and proving that dedication and perseverance could overcome doubt and ridicule. That evening, as she returned home, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She sat at her own piano, the one she had started with years ago, and played softly. The music was personal now, a reflection not only of her skill but also of her journey. She thought about the long hours, the mistakes, the small victories, and the encouragement she had received along the way. She understood that every challenge she had faced had shaped her, every moment of doubt had strengthened her, and every note she had played had prepared her for this success. Her parents watched quietly, proud beyond words. They had witnessed her transformation from a quiet, determined child into a confident, skilled musician, capable of captivating audiences. They knew that this was only the beginning of a lifelong journey in music, and they were thrilled to see her embrace it with passion and dedication. They reminded her that while recognition and applause were gratifying, the true reward lay in the growth, joy, and fulfillment that music brought to her life. In the days that followed, she continued to perform, teach, and compose. She embraced new challenges, explored new styles, and connected with other musicians who shared her love for music. She remained humble, knowing that each performance was an opportunity to learn and grow. She also remembered the early days when neighbors laughed, classmates doubted, and the piano seemed like an impossible dream. Those experiences, once painful, now served as reminders of her resilience, determination, and the power of belief in oneself. Over time, she became known not just for her skill, but for her dedication, humility, and passion.